You are on the next level. This is The Beautiful Truth, where the expression is still free.
10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
And you're very welcome. This is The Beautiful Truth on breakfornews.com, with Fintan Dunne reporting on the 28th of March at 6 Eastern, reporting that finally, the fearmongers are getting asked hard questions, not by the media, don't expect that, but by parliamentarians. And we're getting a step closer to understand what's really going on with this coronavirus and what actual threat it presents. Let's get stuck in and take a look at what's happening with the fearmongers first. This is a member of a House committee in the United Kingdom, and he's about to put a hard question to Professor Ferguson of Imperial College in London. He's a key advisor to the UK government. He's an expert in modelling infectious diseases. He's the guy who said 500,000 people in the United Kingdom could die unless the UK government did something. So, okay, the UK government is doing something with social distancing. So how are we looking now? Is the UK system going to be swamped? What kind of deaths are we expecting now, Professor Ferguson?
Obviously a very serious point is the number of fatalities. Have you made a projection of that? It was obviously one of the concerns that you had in the development of the strategy.
Yes. On the 16th of March, the fatalities would be probably unlikely to exceed about 20,000 with effectively a lockdown. But it could be substantially lower than that.
So there you go. On the 16th of March, in a report, he told the UK government that actually it's looking like around about 20,000 at a maximum and could be substantially lower than that in terms of fatalities. Furthermore, the UK health system would not be overwhelmed and it would all be containable. How on earth did he achieve that change from the huge figure of 500,000, with nothing done admittedly, down to, what is it, 10,000? That would be a national population fatality rate of something like 1 in 6,000, if that was the case, which would be astonishingly low compared to the figures of 3.5% quoted by the WHO. Remember that figure way back as the mortality rate for this disease, 3.5%. And we're talking now from Professor Ferguson there of a figure of 1 in 6,000. Perhaps 1 in 3,000 certainly, if 20,000 people is the figure he's using. So what's going on here? The answer to a lot of things lies in the very next question and answer, which was put to Professor Ferguson. Watch.
And secondly, in the Times yesterday, there's a paper reported, it's before peer review, from Professor Thomas of Bristol University, who questions the damage to the economy and whether that's being taken into account, suggesting, I think on his paper, that a fall of more than 6.5% of GDP would in the long run be worse for health outcomes because of the obvious correlations between GDP and life expectancy.
We don't know what the level of excess deaths will be from this epidemic. And by excess deaths, I mean by the end of the year, what proportion of those people who died from COVID-19 would have died anyhow? But it might be as much as half to 2/3 of the deaths we're seeing from COVID-19.
I'm going to pause that there because that's just incredible. We're going to listen to it again, just so you can hear again him saying that actually when you look at it and calculate the 12-month life expectancy of those who are dying, in other words, how many of those who are dying will be still alive in 12 months anyway, he's saying that from half to 2/3 of the people that it's being reported have died of this disease would have died anyway within 12 months.
I mean, by the end of the year, what proportion of those people who died from COVID-19 would have died anyhow? But it might be as much as half to 2/3 of the deaths preceding COVID-19.
So the hysteria and all the hype is really, is it questionable? Is all of this questionable? If that's the case, are we about to destroy our economies in order to make that kind of an impact in that kind of a patient cohort? No wonder people are talking about the cure being worse than the disease. Let's just take Italy as an example. Here we are, current situation. 10,000 deaths. Seems like a terrible figure. Seems so threatening, doesn't it? Until you listen to what he just said. About 2/3 of the deaths which are being reported are people who would have died within the next 12 months. Within the next 9 months, actually, to literally quote him. He said, what's the figure by the end of the year who would have died anyway? Now let's take a little dig into those figures. I've looked at some of this before. Well, you're going to now understand what's going on finally. 99% of coronavirus patients in Italy who died had other health problems. Indeed, and half of the people who died, at least half of the people who died, were on blood pressure medications. Chances are that perhaps 75 or 70% at least of the people who died were on blood pressure medications, and 45% of them had 3 major illnesses. Half the people who died had 3, not just one major illness, not just like diabetes or renal failure or liver failure or kidney disease or cancer recently. No, but 3 different things wrong with them. No wonder they would have died within 12 months. And of course, we have huge pollution in Italy, as this map showing Italy over the last 3 months demonstrated. I had this in a previous video. And here's the WHO itself with their health assessment, shown all this previously as well. And it says that 8,220 deaths a year on average are attributable to air pollution in Italy. Right? 8,220 deaths a year. I've taken a look into that. I've dug into that, taken a look at the Italian cities report, health impact on PM10 and ozone in 13 Italian cities. And there you are now. There's Lombardy, which is at the heart of all this epidemic, and which has by far and away the most deaths of anywhere in Italy. Still today, on the 27th of March, Lombardy, with its 10 million population and its current fatalities of 5,402. And there's Milan, which is at the centre of Lombardy and really is where this epidemic in Italy started, and has a population of 1.2 million. So if you then take that figure of 1.2 million and figure that there's probably around the Milan area another 2 million people living within range of the air pollution, you eventually come up with a figure that the actual number of people who would be dying in that area is possibly in the region of 3,000. Right? As a result of air pollution issues in any event. So from air pollution issues alone, we can explain a huge amount. From natural causes, we can explain a huge amount of the figures that we've been looking at all this time. And yet, those figures have been used relentlessly to fearmonger you, rather than to put them all in context in terms of every year 8,000 people in Italy die and nobody gives a flying fig. And yet that's never put there as context. So here's some context. Here's some context. They keep on talking about the 1918 flu, which, killed millions upon millions and millions. Yeah, great, I'm sure it did. This isn't that. This isn't then. This is now. What about the Asian flu, which came in 1957 and killed something between 1 and 4 million globally? What about the Hong Kong flu, which came in 68, 69, killed something between 1 and 4 million people globally? The 2009 so-called pandemic 300,000 approximately. And a typical seasonal flu that comes around every year. How many people does the typical seasonal flu kill? Well, if you take a figure somewhere between 290 and 650, let's just call it 500,000. Let's just call it 500,000 people a year dying of the seasonal flu. Let's just take a look at how we are globally now doing. Anywhere close to 500,000 people dead yet? Let's just see how we're doing. No, 29,000. So far, well, we've only just got barely over 500,000 cases. Or have we? Is there something going on, and which is illuminated by Professor Ferguson's comments there? Is there something going on which explains all of this? There is. And the reason for his big revision in these figures is that they're realizing that this thing is spreading faster than they thought. And therefore, that's like good reason to lock down. But conversely, it may have been spreading for quite some time, faster than everybody thought. If it's spreading at 3.0 rather than an RO or turnover rate of 2.5, that's a big difference. And it means there's a lot of it around. An Oxford study said half the people in the United Kingdom may already be infected. That's probably over the top. But certainly a substantial number have already been, in inverted commas, infected with this disease. And you see people coming down, but it's mostly flu symptoms, or head cold symptoms, or in 60% of persons, entirely asymptomatic. So how can we explain that something is asymptomatic, right? There's no symptoms whatsoever in 60% of the people who get it. And yet at the same time, we've seen where health professionals in their 40s are just literally being killed flat. That's what you call a mystery. In medical terms, that's what you call a mystery. There's genetic variation, which means some people are more susceptible. But it's a heck of a long way to try and explain how the same bug is causing no symptoms discernibly in perhaps 60% of the people who contract it, while it's killing others. So there may, in fact, be two bugs going around. Two bugs going around, as was suggested in the paper by Tang et al., T-A-N-G et al., and I've covered it in previous videos, that there is a L strain and an S strain. The S strain is what's going around broadly, and the L strain is the much more potent one, the one which broke out in Wuhan. Now the reason, and if you understand the way things spread, you can understand what's going on and what's going on in the UK. So you have the S strain, which we'll call the small, and the L is the large. So we'll have the S strain, which is the first one, and that spreads quite widely. God knows how long it's been spreading, because we're really not sure. One of the reasons we aren't is that after about 4, 5, 6 weeks after you contract anything like this, it's undetectable again in you. So you can go out and test people who have already had this virus, defeated it, and have antibodies to it, and you'll never know if it happened more than 5 weeks or 6 weeks ago. Their body will be clear of the virus completely. All will be left is the imprint, which their antibodies are going to remember, so that if that little sucker ever comes back, they're going to nail it early and quick, instead of having to manufacture soldiers, which is the usual thing. So those are the dynamics. And if the L version, the one that really packs a hell of a punch, broke out in Wuhan, then that is the same thing that's breaking out in Italy. Because you have huge amount of garment trade movement from China to Milan. And we know that was a inverted commas vector. So what you've probably got going on is a mixture of the two strains which are moving around. The more aggressive strain is now really time's running out for that strain. Why? Because increased surveillance and the fact that its symptoms are more severe and faster means that its capacity to spread is severely limited now. Yes, it did get out of the box in Wuhan, but so also did the benign or relatively benign version, the S. So you've got this mixture of the two moving around, and you've likely got a degree of immunity to one version being conferred on you. If you have been infected by the mild version, you will, who cares if it's the other way around, but if you've been infected by the mild version, there's a good chance that you will have a greater resistance to the more lethal version. And the more lethal version, so far as we've seen to date, has really only broken out substantially, perhaps in Spain, perhaps in Italy. It's going to be hard to tell until we get a lot more information in. One of the things that will illuminate all of that is whether is an antibody test which would enable you to measure that imprint so that you could go and test a whole load of people in a particular village, say, just as a test, pick 200 people and go and test them all just to find out how many have antibodies. And that's the only way you can prove how big this thing is out there. But clearly now the scientists at Imperial College are rethinking, and the British government is rethinking, and everybody's rethinking exactly how much damage they're prepared to do in order to stop something other than this lockdown, which is sensible and very well advised, probably. So the presence of two strains circulating is something that could certainly confuse everybody about what's actually going on with this, and produce essentially two entirely different profiles out of something that's underneath substantially the same. And the test will test, and you will just come up positive on the test, because the test for this, which is available at the moment to test for viral fragments, will look for parts of the virus that don't change, and therefore it's not looking to distinguish between variants that do. It's deliberately not, because that's no use. You'd only be identifying single variants. No, you want to use a part of the genome which doesn't change. So therefore our ability to tell which versions are circulating is very restricted. But right now what they're doing is they're going back and they're checking to see if patients who contracted pneumonia and who were admitted to hospital back at the end of December and early January all over the world, going to check and see, have they got this bug already way back then? Was it circulating for quite some time before we came across it? And if so, which one? Which is a question they've yet to address. So those issues have added so much to the hysteria. And I think with these more sensible assessments of what the overall contraction fatality rate is going to be, probably something in the region of the 57, 59 flu, which was about a 1 in 5,000, that was. So maybe we might see a figure of something between 1 in 3,000 and 1 in 5,000 as the fatality rate. That's certainly what Ferguson's using, and that seems to be what the pollution and other health data in Italy are telling us as well. So the hysteria is explained. However, it is not cured. It's not cured as long as the likes of this crap is going out on mainstream sites. While most cases of the coronavirus are mild, about 20% of patients suffer severe symptoms or become critical. What absolute nonsense. That's an exaggeration by a factor of about 25 times. And by the way, 25 times is the ratio by which Professor Ferguson's we don't do anything 500,000 versus we do 20,000. That's the 25 times reduction you've seen there as well. Not the only thing that's going on in media. Another guy who's continually hyping this is Tony Fauci there, whom Trump isn't buying for a minute. I agree with Trump on this one for sure. I wouldn't buy Anthony Fauci. I know him from way back in HIV/AIDS issues. And the guy told in a scientific paper he wrote that this bug was going to generate something like the seasonal flu, 0.1% case mortality rate when you finally worked it all out. Then he went out and he told everybody in public in the media that it was 20 times more lethal than the flu. Nice one, Tony, where you can't get caught out in the scientific paper. You have to tell the truth, but then you go and hype it up on TV. Not the only guy hyping it up. Bill Gates has also been in saying it's tough to tell people to keep going to restaurants, go buy new houses, ignore that pile of bodies over in the corner. I know, Bill, you're such a humanitarian. That's the thing I like about you, Bill. It's always just about people and how you can help them, isn't it?
You've invested $10 billion in vaccinations over the last 2 decades, and you figured out the return on investment for that, and it kind of stunned me. Can you walk us through the math?
Well, it's pretty impressive that when you take these vaccines, get them to be very inexpensive by making big volume commitments, have that right relationship with the private sector, get the delivery system so they're really getting the coverage out there, you literally save millions of lives. And 20 years ago, when we created these new multilateral organizations, Gavi for the vaccines, Global Fund for HIV, TB and malaria, we didn't know they'd be successful. They've gone through lots of challenges about making sure the money gets there, making sure the efficiency is right. But as we look at upcoming replenishments for those, and we've got so much distraction politically that the international needs like this could get eclipsed if we're not careful. We see a phenomenal track record. It's been $100 billion overall that the world's put in. Our foundation is a bit more than $10 billion, but we feel there's been over a 20-to-1 return. So if you just look at the economic benefits, that's a pretty strong number compared to anything else. The human benefit in millions of lives saved. So
yeah, the human benefit as well, of course, Bill, naturally the human benefit as well. But of course, mainly the 20-to-1 return on investment, which is terrific. And Bill has his little investments going on there too. So that 10 billion philanthropic investment by Bill will pay off rich rewards many times over. Thanks very much, Bill. Yes. I don't know if you buy that little grin. I have trouble buying it. Beware of snake oil salesmen. Beware of fearmongers. And beware of unnecessary hype. And beware of destroying your economy for the benefit of saving lives, many of which will be lost in any event. When the Titanic went down, there was a policy, women and children first. Why? Because people with brains could figure out that sometimes you have to choose the way that saves the most lives. That takes guts. It's a guts that's lacking. And the truth is required in order to inform those guts. That's just as lacking. I hope we've shed a little light on both of those issues. With this update, I will be back with more very soon, and I do hope that you can join me for that. But in the meantime, for breakfornews.com, this has been Fintan Dunne reporting.